Romeo Is A Deadman is Grasshopper Manufacture's new game, and it feels like they are firing on all cylinders. And there was like a big, naked, headless woman. I'll get to that later. I very joyfully got to play 30 minutes of Romeo Is A Deadman, and I got 4 things to tell you about it. 1, this is Grasshopper Manufacture completely coming into its own. It feels like this game is encapsulating the entity of that studio beyond just Suda 51, but actually showcasing all the talents of the team. Number 2, multimedia. I'm telling you, like, practical effects, FMV, pixel art, 3D graphics, animation, comic books are all colliding into one thing, and it is beautiful. Number 3, now, admittedly, I don't always play Grasshopper Manufacture games for their gameplay, but I can say that I actually enjoyed playing this. There's a lot going on in there. I'm excited about it. And number 4, this just feels like Grasshopper Manufacture just like really enjoying itself and just basically leaving nothing on the cutting room floor. Hands down, this is my favorite thing that I played at Gamescom this year. Yes, it is true. I am a fan of Grasshopper Manufacture as a developer. I'm a fan of Suda. You know, maybe of course it's playing to the things that I like, but this just feels special because it actually feels like this game, more than any other game by this developer, is actually encapsulating everything that the developer is capable of. So from the top, it is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet. You play as Romeo, who started as a state trooper and then eventually joins the FBI, and along his way, he meets a girl named Juliet. But somewhere along the way, there's trouble in paradise, things happen. It doesn't quite work out the way the actual story of Romeo and Juliet does. In typical Grasshopper Manufacture, I'm not gonna try and necessarily explain or make sense to you what happens, but eventually Romeo turns into like a tokusatsu Kamen Rider-like superhero and is, as a part of the FBI, is like a time traveler who is killing all sorts of different monsters and kind of seems to be tiptoeing in this antagonistic relationship with Juliet. It's very surreal and heady in a way that I couldn't quite grasp during my preview, but enough to get an idea that this character Romeo is dealing with stuff. Which brings me to another interesting point that I kind of had. Now, if you're familiar with Grasshopper Manufacture, you probably know No More Heroes or Shadows of the Dam. Both those games feature very macho, over-the-top, crude, lowbrow characters who are like every line away from making a dick joke. That's just the brand of this company. The thing that I found really interesting about this character, Romeo, is that he is kind of more of a young, innocent, coming-of-age sort of character. He's not as crude or as disgusting, or maybe even as self-aware as the other characters in No More Heroes or Shadows of the Dam. And this kind of made for a really interesting, I don't know, switch up in the Grasshopper sort of formula. I am so used to playing those games and having them just sort of like, I don't know, crudeness given to me. But this was a sort of a moment where I saw a character that seemed more sensitive, more innocent. There was a moment when he was being kind of tempted to drink wine from Juliet, and he was almost didn't want to do it, but it kind of was alluding to themes that, according to the director Suda, who I had a chat with, wasn't entirely intentional, but still show through some ways. Now, for the actual gameplay, it is a hack and slash, but it's a hack and slash that has a lot going on. So you have a series of 4 abilities that kind of like spawn a different version of you. There's one to briefly heal you, there's one to freeze enemies around you, there's one that throws projectiles, and then one that poisons enemies. And you kind of use these as a means of crowd control and other things. In my demo, I was in this like swampy, messed up, dark forest fighting zombies, but they were business suits. That's just occurring to me. I was in a swamp, but these like normal old suburban folk in their suits and ties coming to kill me as zombies. Why they're in the swamps? Who's to say? But they were there. I also had 4 melee weapons as well as 4 different guns to choose from. And then on top of that, you have a meter you have to charge. So the longer you go without getting hit, a meter charges up, which then unlocks a special move. There was a lot of things, a lot of tools to use. The preview I played kind of, I admit, didn't do the best job of showcasing all of them because the enemies were fairly spongy. There were some change up of enemy types where they had specific parts on them that you had to use, you had to shoot first to be able to knock a whole bunch of their ammo, their health off before chopping them up. But it all felt good, even though I didn't really feel like I got a full grasp of using it all in a sort of synergy. It still felt solid. It felt like there was a lot of room for creativity. For the guns, there was a pistol, there was a shotgun, there was a minigun, and then there was a bazooka. Then you had 4 melee weapons. The main one, the default one, being a katana. There was like these like fist cuff stabby things, and then there was kind of like a spear, and then there was a big bulky sort of like, you know, big shouldered sword thing. You know what I'm talking about. What are they called? Claymores? And then on top of that is jumps and dashes, as well as a heavy and light attack. So there's a lot to work with. This all ended with a boss fight where you meet Juliet, which is all told through a comic book-like style, and that ends with Juliet tearing her own head off and then growing into a giant mutated naked lady beast that shoots fireballs from her hands. And while this is happening, this sick metal song starts to play that is bespoke to it. In fact, the boss fight is called Every Day is Like a Monday, which is actually a wink and a nod to the Morrissey, or I think it's the Smith song, Every Day is Like a Sunday. And when I actually asked Suda about this, he didn't know what to name this boss fight, but he thought about how much it would suck if every day was like a Monday. So he wanted this boss fight to feel kind of like that feeling. And it was basically like the Swedish tokusatsu Kamen Rider fighting basically a naked giant headless woman kaiju. And maybe it's not the most appropriate thing to say, but it was beautiful. Now on the multimedia part of it, all of this is spliced together with an array of different mediums, not just graphics like computer graphics, but comic book art. When you die, the game over screen is a prosthetic, like an actual film prosthetic face that is melting. The flesh off it melts and then melts, like then comes back onto it. It's phenomenal. There's like animated scenes that use this amazing like fisheye lens sort of style, like with all this rotoscoping. Art style is changing constantly between cutscenes. I could probably confidently say within like a span of 15 seconds, I saw 3 different art styles happening. And when I talked to Suda about this, his sort of thinking was he realized that the people at Grasshopper Manufacture had so many different talents that were so good at one specific thing that he basically just gave them the keys to be like, if you're good at that, if you want to do that, we should find a way to make sense of it in this game. So that's where it kind of comes off like Grasshopper Manufacture kind of finally extending sort of the guise of the auteur of Suda, but actually kind of coming into its own. Now, it was only 30 minutes. And of course, it was tailored to a specific experience to show a lot of different things off. But if this 30 minutes can keep this up for however long this game ends up being, it is going to be a fist-pumping punk rock album of a video game. In fact, the t-shirts that they were using at the booth was the cover of The Clash's London Calling with the dude smashing the guitar, but instead it was Romeo smashing his sword into the ground. And I think that is absolutely, totally emblematic of what this game feels like. It feels like a bunch of talented, really cool, creative people got in a room and decided to just be like, what can we do? And that comes through. And I feel it. From headless big women to this like Tetsu Metal Man style stuff and Tokusatsu Kamen Rider stuff all smashed together. It's just reminded me that video games have come a long way since Pac-Man.